Hi everyone, and this is going to be a short video working through a modelling with extrudes exercise for Mech 1110 within CREO 9. So the exercise that we're going to use to demonstrate this is the latch that you can see on the screen through here. So before you model anything within CREO, the first thing you should ask yourself is how do I actually model it? So actually come up with a bit of a plan of attack before you jump into it. And this is what we call design intent, and that's something that I'll go through in the lecture. So when we talk about design intent, you actually want to think about how is this thing actually made and what are the steps we're going to undertake. The other thing that you'll also want to think about is a thing that we call parent-child relationships. And essentially what that means is you may have the parent, which essentially is your main body, and the child is the things that hang off it in this instance. So the way that I'm going to approach this particular part is, in this top view, I'm going to model this sort of rectangular section with the radius 10 ends with the two holes in it. So that'll be operation 1, and that'll be my parent feature. Then the second operation that I'm going to do is this back section through here, so that'll be the first child. And then the third operation I'm going to do is this, what we typically call little triangular section, which we typically call as a gusset. So they're going to be the three main operations for this particular item. So let's get into it. So jumping into CREO, and I'm going to drag the picture on and off when I need to just to show you dimensions and the like. One thing to notice as well is at the moment you probably can't see my virtual mouse. So to change this, so your default will be a white screen. That's perfectly fine to model in. Some of the colors may be slightly different. There's no issue there. I'm just going to simply change my system appearance from custom to the default theme. And it gives me a bit more of a colored background, and now you can see my virtual mouse, so you can see what I'm clicking as we work along this exercise. So if I create a new part, and I'm just going to simply call this modeling underscore with underscore extrudes underscore latch. And remember, and I'll do this again for completeness, if I had a space here, that's an illegal character in CREO. So if I go OK, it's going to say no, that we can't do that. So one other thing that we have forgotten to do, and I've done this deliberately, we're going to go back and actually cancel out of this temporarily. And this is a step you need to do for each session, just so you know where you're saving your files, is to select the working directory. So if I click on select working directory, it's in my default folder at the moment. I'm going to set it onto the desktop. And I'm going to create a new folder and call it week underscore one underscore CREO. So whenever you're working within CREO, it's just a good habit to get into the habit of putting underscores instead of spaces. So if I go OK, and we're now in that working directory, so you can see it up the top, week 1 CREO, we go OK. And now I can create that new part. So it'll be modeling with underscore extrudes underscore latch, and then we can go OK, and then it should pop up the planes like this, and we're ready to go. So if we come back through and bring the part back up, so what I'm going to do is essentially this is a top view, a back view, and a side view. So for this first operation, we're going to actually use our top frame, a top datum plane, sorry. So I'm just going to drag this off to the side of the screen through here. So I'm going to select my top datum plane. And then I'm going to go through and click extrude. You can click sketch and then extrude, as I demonstrated in the previous cube extrude example, but this time we're just going to jump straight in. So if we come back to our particular schematic here, so what we've got where these holes are, we're 55 millimeters assumed from the center, and then we're 20 mils in terms of height. So let's jump through and whack that in. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the rectangle tool here. I'm going to drop down and go for a center rectangle. And what that can do is essentially allow us to pick up that center. And then we can bring that out, and so I've left click there and then left click again, and then center click out to exit out of the actual center rectangle operation. So our dimensions here were 55 millimeters. And then our thickness was 20 millimeters. And then we've got those driven dimensions there. Okay, so bringing our schematic back onto the screen. So the next stage that I'm going to do is I'm going to put two holes again. These are assumed to be in the center of this 20 millimeters, indicated by the center lines. And then we'll get our rounded corners in as well. So I'll show you how to do that. So bringing that back across out of the road. So if I go for a circle now, so this is the next operation down. So there's a few options in here. The one you want to use is a center and point. So you essentially select the center. So you can see that I've snapped onto that green line and I want to create a circle. So it's going to create it on that line, which that's what the drawing's indicating. So if I click at the center there and then drag this out and then click again with my left click and then center click out, and now it's giving me this circle. And what we're doing here is we're building geometry as we go. And this is from a sketching side of things. And then from there, we'll actually build that geometry into the third dimension. So the diameter of that particular hole is 6 millimeters. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to let CREO assume something for us, and I'll show you how to do this. So if we come through and click the circle button again, and if you can see by the, now we're off to the right hand side with the green line highlighted. So I center click on there because that's in the center of that rectangle and actually start to drag out. You'll see that as I get to the same diameter, that little, the first circle that I've done has now turned green, and I've also got the little equal sign next to it. So what that's saying is that both of those circles will be the same diameter. So if I change the dimension on the first circle that we did, it'll automatically update this second one, which is what we want to do in this case. And this is what we call design intent. So by doing this, you're actually going to have a more robust model, and it's going to be more efficient for you to model. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to teach you here is modeling practice that's going to make you efficient out in industry once you finish your degrees. So if I then left click and then center click out, I now have two 6 mil holes, and that's shown that both of these, so you can see the little equal sign there with the 1, and then we've also got the little equal sign if I scroll in with the 1 here as well. So it's indicating that those two circles are the same at the moment. So the next operation we've got, if I come back through, so we know an R10 is obviously double of the 20, so we can just simply, at that sort of construction line that we've got at the moment, we can just simply put our circle in. So there's two ways we can do this for the radius end. So if I come back out, we can just simply go with our circle tool, pick up the center of that line. So it's picking up at the moment with that symbol that the circle that we've previously put in with the new one I want to put in, they're going to be concentric to each other, so in the same location. So if I click that and then I snap out to that point and then center click out, and then we've got our end section. And then what you can come through and do is use what we call the delete segment tool. And that's where you can start to, you can see it's highlighted in the orange there. I can start to delete the segments that I don't want out. And then I need to delete these 4 as well. So it'll effectively segment the line with any connecting, intersecting geometry, if you like. Okay, so it won't quite turn, so you'll see that the inner hole at the moment has turned pink, and that's because it's what we call a closed sketch. So what we're going to do now, there's another operation that we could do. So we could use the arc tool to do this rounded section as well. So let's try that for the other end. So if I go through to the second option down here, so it's called the center and ends option. And then again, what we want to do is pick up to be concentric to that existing hole that we've put in, and then drag it out. And you'll see that we've got a dashed line where it is going to create the circle that similar to what we created to the other side. But once you pick up this particular point that you can see I've got highlighted here, if we left click there and then drag around, we're going to just create half a circle this time. And then we snap to that point there, we can left click again and then center click out. And now you can see that highlighted section, we've got that semicircle. So honestly, it doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of this particular object, which way you want to go, but certainly either operation will get you there. And then we can come through to our delete segment tool again. And then I can click this line, get rid of that one, that one, that one, and that one. And then if I center click out, you can see now we've got the fully shaded object. And you can also show that CREO has assumed now that we've got a radius 10 because that driven dimension we initially had has gone. If you want the overall, rather than working in radiuses, you just want the width of this to be your driven dimension, so the dimension you change to update your model. What you can come through and do is use this button through here. So this is the dimension button. So if we click that button there and we click this line, left click this line, and then drag our cursor over here and then center click out, you can now see that's that dimension we originally had. So if I updated that to 30, for example, it's going to automatically update all those interconnecting points. And then what we'll do is we'll change that back to 20 because that's what we're working to. So if I bring this particular drawing back, you can see that I've got 55 millimeters. If I can try and get them both on the screen, which I can. So you can see I've got 55 millimeters here, 20 millimeters here, with two 6 mil diameter holes, and because they're equal to each other. So that's our first sketch done. So what we can now do, dragging that off, is go OK. And then what it's going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to basically what thickness do you want. So CREO in this instance has assumed I want 47.5 millimeters. But if we look at the drawing, all we want is 5 millimeters here. And in this instance, what we're going to do is, instead of being variable, as I explained in the first video, just being sort of extruded upwards from the top plane, we want it to be symmetric about it. So I'm just going to click down and go symmetric in this option. And then we can go through and click OK. And that's our first extrude, our first operation. So this is what we call our parent part, or parent operation, if you like. So it's the parent part of this particular component. And then from here, once we've got our parent made, then we can make the children that basically hang off it, if you like. So what we're going to do is, looking back at our drawing, the next operation that I'm going to do is this top section through here. So you can see in the drawing that it's basically flush with this back particular edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one over here, and we can actually use surfaces now rather than planes to actually build our geometry off. So one thing to keep in mind is you want the best orientation for your object. So to do this, if you drop down in this menu through here, so this is just the view menu, so we want to go to isometric. So the reason I've done this is I essentially want to show this gusset section in an isometric view, just to, again, this comes down to your axonometric views. You want to just have as minimal views as possible. So to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to let CREO do the work here. So instead of, if I move this one across to there, I think we can get all this on the screen, if I get it out of the road of my head. So what we essentially want to do, instead of using this face that's, if I can get it, whoop, that face there, once I do an isometric view in this orientation, I'm not going to be able to see that triangular section. So what I'm actually going to do is sketch off the opposite side. So actually select, if I turn this one around, I'm going to sketch off this particular side. So if we come through and do another extrude, and again, if we bring the drawing up, I've got assumed to be in the center again, a 30 millimeter wide square section, 30 millimeters high from the bottom, with two holes in it as well, which are 5 mil in diameter. So what we're going to do is, I'll drag that one over there. So instead of using our center rectangle tool this time, what we'll try, just for something a little bit different, is your corner rectangle tool. So if I come down through the bottom through here, one step we should have done first is to make sure it's symmetrical about everything, is to chuck a center line down the middle. And what this allows CREO to do, it identifies that you may want that line to assume symmetry about a particular sketch that you're doing, and that's what we're going to do in this instance. So if we come through and hit the rectangle and I click somewhere about there, then I drag across, you can see if I bring it back here, I don't have any little symbols at the moment, but if you see where I snap across, up on the top left hand side of this rectangle, you can see that little sort of arrow with the dashed line. So what that's indicating is that's going to be symmetric about that center line that we've just put in. So what we'll do is we'll just center click, so click that one, move across, we're symmetric again, and then what we're going to do is then left click and then center click out. So what we're going to do is drag that dimension down there and that dimension across there. So the width of this one was 30 millimeters, and then from the bottom to the top, our dimension was also 30 millimeters. And then we've got that component. So the next stage that we're going to do is to add in our circles. So we just randomly put a circle in some place like that. And you can see that I've got a little dashed line and the sort of the blue circle with the dashed line. What that's saying is the next circle that I want to create, that's going to be at the same height as the original one. So I'm just going to select that one through there. And again, I drag out, you can see the first circle is now green, and that means that the second circle is going to be equal to it. Left click and then center click out, and then we've got a bit of a mess of dimensions here. So what we're going to do is use our dimension tool to clean this up. So if we look at our particular hole location through here, so coming back to the drawing, what it's assuming here is that our radius 5 out here is concentric with these particular holes. So what that then indicates is that from the top down to here, this is going to be 5 millimeters working off the radius itself. So if we drag back through here, so to do that, the easiest way to do the dimension, if I left click on the center of that hole and then left click on that line and then drag my cursor off to the side. So the reason I need to drag off to the side, so if I select 2 points, for example, I effectively, if I want this point to this point, what that dimension is, I need to drag my cursor and then center click in between it, if that makes sense. So I've selected those 2 points, and then in the middle of those two, I'd center click, and then I simply make that 5 millimeters. So the other dimension that we've got is dragging this drawing back across. I've got 20 millimeters from either side, and again, from center of the hole to the center of the hole. So again, we're going to assume that it's symmetric about the center plane there. So the easiest way to do that is to, for your dimension tool, pick up that center line, left click and pick up that hole, and then drag out. So move your mouse up and then drag through and center click up to the top, and we call that 10 millimeters. And then we do the same through here. So left click, move your cursor up to about there, and then we center click. And that one's 10 as well. So the only other one we've got left is the diameter of the hole. So if I double click on this one, we just want to make that particular hole to be 5 millimeters. So there's a couple of ways that we can do the next operation. So if we bring this drawing back across, we do have these radius or rounded corners at the top. So there's 2 ways we can do this, and I'm going to show you both operations. So on the first one, what we're going to do is we're going to work through and click onto our fillet tool. So if I click on the fillet tool and then I select this line and then this line, it's going to give us the round. And then what we can do is we can essentially double click and then change that into a radius 5, as you can see through here. And then what we'll do is I'll save this one and I'll show you another operation that can do the other side for us, because remembering in the drawing that both sides were rounded. So if I click through and go OK, and then what we want to do is we want to effectively look at our drawing. So from that back face, we're 5 millimeters inboard of the particular item. So flicking back through and flicking this way. So now we're going inboard of the item as we want. And then what we can now do is select our depth. So this is from where you've sketched through to our depth, which is 5 millimeters. And then that's our surface through there. And then we can go OK. So the other operation we can do to get the rounded corner on this particular edge is use this little tool here, which is called the round tool. So if I simply click the round tool and then select that edge, I can then come through, and it's a circular round that we obviously want here. I can set that radius to be 5 millimeters, and then it's going to give us the same operation as what we did in that previous operation with the fillet. And then we can go through and go OK. So one thing, and again I've done this deliberately, if we come back to the drawing, what you'll see is I've sort of sketched down the bottom from this bottom line up to this top line and given it a 30mm dimension. I probably wouldn't make that in reality. I would probably have 3 pieces of plate, and then I would cut them to size and then stick them probably together in a weld and weld them together, for example. So what we can do is you can actually come back and edit sketches, and let's do that for that last operation. So what we'll come through and do, I'm just going to delete this round out and we'll complete it fully in the sketch. I just wanted to show you that operation there. So now if we come down to extrude and drop down on that little arrow through there, and we're going to hover over section 1. So section 1's effectively the sketch you put together. If we right click on that and drag up to the top, you'll see what I call the ball with the little wand on it. So that's what we call edit definition. So if I click on that, it's going to take me back to my sketch where I can now fix this. So what we can do is I'm just going to delete all of this out and then do it again very quickly. So if I delete all of that out and do my center line. So in practice, what you would typically do is you want to try to start to think about how you would make things in reality. So when you're initially starting to use CREO, I'm quite happy for you to work through the drawings in terms of what's on the screen, such as the first operation I did. But as you start to work through in a little bit more advanced operations and alike, you want to start thinking about how you would make it in reality. And this again comes down to your design intent. So what we're going to need to do, before we do our rectangle, is go to references and click, once you click on references, so this is where you can select different geometry and alike that you can use as a reference to then build further geometry off. I want to come down and hover over that line, and then you'll click and see that another dotted line's come through, and that's saying that that top surface is now a reference. So what we can do, similar to before, is select our rectangle and then click through and have it symmetric, and then left click and center click out. So bringing the drawing across, so now we need to do a little bit of maths. So what you can do is you've got our thickness of 5 millimeters for the base plate and then 35. So that'll naturally come through to 25 millimeters that we need for our height now. You can also let CREO do this. So if we drag this dimension across to here, I can simply double click and then go, our 30 millimeters minus 5 millimeters, and then it's going to give me my 25 millimeters. And then our width in this instance was 30 millimeters. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use my fillet tool immediately, and this is just so I can speed up the process a little bit. So this again is becoming a little bit more efficient. So if I select my fillet tool and select those two lines, and then also select the top line and that line. And now what we can do is we can come across here, and this is something we'll start to use a bit more in a few weeks' time, but we can immediately start to use our equal tool. So this is where I can make these two radiuses equal to each other. So if I select the equal tool, click this arc and then this arc with my left click and then center click out, you'll see that that's slightly changed, and I've only got one dimension now where I've again got that little equals with a 1 sign and an equals with a 1 sign there. So if I come through and double click on center click out of the equals, drag that dimension out. So to drag a dimension, it's simply just hold with the left click and then drag once you've highlighted over it. So now I can double click on this and then go 5, and now I've got my radiuses. And what that's actually done is that, if we come back to the drawing, has set up those coordinate points. So I don't need to actually go through and put all those dimensions in like I did before. But if you're more comfortable doing that initially as you're building your skills up in CREO, that's more than fine as well. Okay, so dragging that one out of the road. So now I can go to my circle tool, pick up the center. So you'll see that the little concentric sign in the blue circle's there again. And I can drag that out and then left click. And again, come across there, drag out, make them equal to each other and left click. And then if we drag that dimension out, and that one was a diameter 5. So you can immediately see that that was already a quicker operation. One thing to note though is, and this can happen when you use the fillet tool, so you do want to be a little bit careful. You'll see down the bottom through here, this has actually turned out to now be 14.87. So it's just slightly moved things about when we were setting up those particular fillets. So all I need to simply do in that instance, if you do want to use this operation, is to change that from 30 to 15 millimeters so we know it's in the center. The other option that you could obviously do is you could work through and just use that round tool as I demonstrated before, whichever you're more comfortable with. At the end of the day, there's no real right or wrong answer in terms of modeling. It's just about what you're most comfortable with and most efficient with. So the operations that I just did then for me would be the most efficient way of doing it. However, the first way that I did it may be the better way for yourself, especially when you're learning the skills. The only other thing that I'll note is that you'll see that the 25 has also changed, so sometimes you do need to check those. So when using the fillet tool, just be careful to make sure all your construction geometry and dimensions haven't changed, and if they do, you can just simply update them. So if we go through and essentially now go to OK. Oh, sorry, before we do that, one thing I just did want to note. You'll notice that when I changed, and I'll go Control Z to show you, you'll notice that the 14.87 is in light blue. So if I click and drag that down, so that's just a dimension at the moment. Once I change it to 15, depending on the other dimensions within your model, that'll automatically update to be dark blue. So that's now what we call a driven dimension. So you may see if we double click this one and change that to 25, that has stayed as that reference dimension, and that's simply because it's actually picking up the reference of this dashed line, which is fine as well. As long as the dimensions actually are the same as what's on the drawing, you're good to go. So if we click through and go OK, and you can see that that's just simply updated that object, and now our second extrude is just off that top surface and not actually sort of eating into the side of this particular one down below as it was before. Again, when you're starting to build these skills, either option is fine. I just wanted to show you both in this particular video. So if we bring our drawing back, we're almost there. So we've done our parent part and then our first child feature. So then the next child feature is just this little gusset or triangular section. So one thing to keep in mind, and this does take a little bit of time to get your head around, is so we've technically speaking got 2 parents and then 2 children. So this main first part we did, that's apparent to both the subsequent extrudes that we're doing. but technically the back piece that we just did, that would be the parent to then this little triangular section as well. So you just want to start to think about, with that design intent, actually building up those operations in terms of how these things fit together with each other. And the key thing is to make sure you talk about and think about how your model looks before you work through it. So if I drag that one back across there, so what I'm going to use now to do this triangular section is I'm going to use my plane again, and because we know this is in the center, I'm going to use the right plane. So I click on the plane and then click on the extrude button. So you'll see that it's given me a bit of a funky view. So what you can actually do is you could work with this. So I could just simply connect the dots and run with it. If it's putting you off a little bit, what you can come and through and do is go to Sketch Setup. And then you'll see that down here, orientation, I can actually change that to top, for example. That's not giving me what I want. Or I could go left or right. So for most of you, probably going to, if you followed this exactly, I'd probably go to the left option, because that's the one that's going to make the most sense in this instance. So if I come through, and sorry, I dragged that over there so I can show those options a bit better out of the road of the mouse. So it's the orientation button, and you can change that from top, bottom, left or right. So right would look a little bit odd because it's upside down in this instance. We could also flip to get it in the right orientation, so it's the same as our drawing. So you can have a play with these just to see which orientations are going to work the best. And then you will click sketch through there. And what I want to come through and do is to pick up some references again. So clicking the reference button and then selecting this line and then this line. And then also we're going to pick up this line as well, just to make our life and that one a little bit easier. So I've got the four, that edge, that edge, that edge, and that edge. So I can close out of that one. And now what I'm going to do is select my line tool. And all it is simply closing the dots. So there to there to there and then to there. And then center click out. And then we can go OK. And you can see that we're ready to go now. So if we bring this one across, so we've got 5 millimeters where it's assumed to again be in the center of this particular object. So what we're going to do is drag that one across. We're going to make that 5 millimeters, and then we're going to automatically change that to symmetric, and then click through and go OK, and then we're good to go. So there's a few other options that you can work with as well. So if I right click this time, so if I drop down and want to edit my sketch, you go to section 1, but if I want to actually edit and I've gone, oops, I've put in the wrong dimension for my thickness of my extrude, you can come back and just edit the extrude. So if we essentially right click on extrude and hit the little ball with the wand on it, so our edit definition, you'll see that turns yellow again, and this is where I can edit the extrude. So you can actually drag this to go thicker and thinner and alike. One of the tools which is quite useful, and you can have a play with these, so variable will take it from the plane that you've, or the geometry you've extruded off, to a thickness in either direction. Symmetric will obviously be symmetric about that point in the terms of the thickness. To next, so that's where you can extrude up to the next surface. Through all is where you want to intersect with all surfaces. Through until is where you can intersect with a selected surface. Or the one that I use quite frequently is to reference. So if I click on this, my sketch is temporarily going to disappear. So I've got my sketch in the center plane that we, that right plane that we used. So what I can now do is I could select that surface, for example, and it's going to extrude directly to that surface. And the reason that this is actually quite useful is if I then go, oops, I need to change from my 30 millimeter width on this back section through here, maybe up to 40 millimeters, say, it's going to automatically update that for you. So it's a very useful tool as well. So again, you can have a play with all of these, and you'll start to use these tools, and we're here to help you to learn these tools as well as you work through the various exercises of your CREO portfolio. So if I just cancel out of that and go back to where I want to go, so yes, I want to cancel. And then we've got our object. So if I now turn the plane off, the annotations and the center spin, and then if I drop down and now go back to my isometric view, you'll see we've got that object. And that's probably a screenshot that I would take. You may want to spin it around a little bit so you can show that possibly these holes are through holes and those holes are through holes, so you probably maybe need 2 images in that instance. But for this first particular exercise, I'd just probably roll with an isometric view there, and you should be good to go. Okay, so once we've got our view ready for submission, the first thing I would do is come through and save our part. So there's two ways you can do it. You can either click through File and save it through here, or just click the little save button up there. So because I've already got this open, I'm going to go through here. So we'll just click through and save. And then it's already going to save it to my working directory that I already had selected. So we go through and go OK. As I mentioned in the first video, at the moment it's .prt.1. So if I change something, I can then come through and go save again, and it's just going to update it to .prt.2, so just a second instance of it. And then the final thing you need to do, I'll just do it for completeness, is our snipping tool. And then with our snipping tool, create a new one, and then we want to drag over and select our screenshot like this. And then we can file, save as. And I'm just going to save that into desktop, into my working folder. And I'm just going to call that week 1 in this instance. Week 1 CREO. And then just go save. And then that would have saved for you. And then you'll obviously be able to follow the submission procedure as well. Okay, so that's the procedure in terms of saving the object. So we're here to help you work through this particular exercises and also the exercises within your portfolio for Mech 1110. I'm certainly looking forward to watching everyone build these particular skills up. So if you do get stuck with any of these tasks, certainly do reach out where we'll be able to give you a hand, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for listening.